We filled the forms, we chased the dream.
Hello and welcome to Vox Popular, the podcast where voices turn into visions and experiences become guidance. I am Neha Tripathi, career counselor, Sunbeam Bhagwanpur, and today's episode is especially close to our students' dreams. For many young minds, studying abroad is not just a destination, it's about preparation, perspective, and of course, purpose. What does it really take to step into a classroom that belongs to the globe? How early should one begin? And how does one prepare not just academically but emotionally and mentally, and most importantly, financially? To help us answer these questions, we are joined by someone who once sat where our students sit today. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome Mr. Ishan Mukherjee to our podcast today, one of our alumni who has successfully navigated the journey of studying abroad and is here to share his real life experiences. Welcome, Ishan. Welcome to Vox Pop.
Thank you for having me, ma'am.
So, how have you been, Ishan? How was your journey moving on to, say, from India, especially from Varanasi?
I think I have been fine, and the US is a pleasant place in general. My journey was, I think, the main thing to underline here is that I have been extremely fortunate in getting to the US. As much as I can list all the things that my school has done for me and all the preparation that I did, it's important to consider there's always a baseline of luck involved in getting to the US. So I think I have been lucky that the randomized process of getting into a top school worked out for me. But besides that, it took a lot of preparation and a huge amount of support from the many teachers and the extracurricular opportunities that Sunbeam provides. And yeah, I'd be happy to talk about them.
What sparked your interest in studying abroad, Ishan? And what do you think? When did you begin thinking that you would go abroad and study? Especially
I actually quite clearly remember the moment I decided that studying abroad in the US would be a correct move. And it was when this NEET topper called Stuti Khandwala's ad came out in the newspaper. And she chose to go to MIT instead of a top Ames college. And she cited that she wanted to do research. And the US provided a bedrock of doing research. So that was one factor, that the US might have better opportunities than India. And the second was that I wanted to work in AI since I was very little, since I was in grade 11, because I decided that AI was going to be hugely important this century. And this was before ChatGPT came out. And my bet basically played out in terms of how companies played out. And very few AI companies were in India, and in general, very few tech companies were in India. If I went to the US, it was clear that with the 3-year STEM OPT you get, with the 3-year work you get after college, you can probably work at one of these companies. And getting to those companies from IITs is much harder, and very few IIT students get to those companies. So it seemed clear that it was worth investing a lot of time preparing for admissions in the US.
Ishan, you've been really very fortunate enough to get a lot of scholarship since I have seen you getting those scholarships myself. How did you choose, or how did you decide, or how did you zero down on this particular college where you're studying right now? So please introduce the college as well.
Yes, I am studying computer science at Northwestern University, which is in Chicago. And it was actually extremely fortunate that I landed on that scholarship. I was very interested in AI, as I mentioned, and there's this organization called Open Philanthropy, which was big in AI safety at the time and was funding undergraduate students. And the scholarship has since closed, which I got. There were just 3 batches, and I was in the first batch. So again, it was very fortunate that I got the scholarship, and it was to give you a sense of how fortunate it was. There's a career counselor in Varanasi, and he simply could not believe that I got a Fulbright scholarship to one of these universities. So that played out well. Today, there are other opportunities, lots of universities, 6 universities in the US are need blind, which means even if you apply for need-based aid, it won't be considered against you. And lots of universities do also give need-based aid, though they're not blind. I have friends at Northwestern who received aid from them. So I think that is a factor to consider if you're applying to the US, certainly.
Since you told me that you started preparing for studying abroad very early, how did you prepare for the application process? What was your preparation like? And what would you suggest our students to, and when should they begin preparing?
I think I started preparing relatively late. I started preparing only in grade 12. And most students should decide way earlier, like at least in grade 11, ideally. But most students who go to the US from India decide even earlier. Like in grade 8, they have counselors who are advising them on the extracurricular activities they should be doing. I think there are two things to focus on besides academics. The US does look at academics and the US does look at SAT scores. But a lot of students I talk to who want to go to the US have a kind of SAT blindness where they think scoring very high on the SAT will automatically get them into a good program in the US. That is not the case. It's actually quite easy to score high on the SAT if you've gone through the Indian high school system, because like you get taught English very well in Sunbeam, and you automatically are very good in math if you if you go through a STEM program until grade 10. So SAT is definitely not a challenge. It's a challenge to build out your extracurricular activities profile. And it's a challenge to write essays. For extracurricular activities, you want some kind of distinction on a national level, or you want to do something that looks interesting on an application. I did a TEDx event,
I
and
remember that.
yeah, and that event got a lot of viewership. So that was the spike on my profile, and that is probably what stood out to admissions officers. Other students' examples I've seen is one student self-published a novel, and that is something you could try. Other students who got into like the highest, the top colleges like MIT, they did very well in Olympiads, that kind of thing. So you want to decide very early what kind of extracurricular activities you want to build out, and then start planning for them. The other thing is essays. And honestly, you don't need counselor advice for essays. I did not have any counselors. In fact, I wrote my Northwestern essay in 30 minutes, and I just submitted it right before the deadline. A lot of the essays that I wrote were written at the last minute. You should obviously not do that. You should write them a month in advance, and then try to bring out an authentic voice in your essays. You will get better at writing essays as you write them, which is why you want to devote enough time to them. But all these essays as well don't require outside counselor guidance. Just begin them early, and you get better at them over time. So those are the two main things to focus on that your high school will not automatically give you.
So a lot of students have this, they are under this image that doing extracurriculars in class 11th is actually the most important thing, and then they somewhat subside their academics. Do you think it's good for them?
No, I think this is very bad for them, actually. It's also important to have very high grades. Like all the Indian international students are like, Sri Lankan international students I know at Northwestern had some of the top grades in their class. So while you're doing extracurricular activities, it's also quite important to do academics. What I'll say is that it's not as important to do APs or IBs or things outside of your curriculum. There are students who did only CBSE and ICSE at Northwestern that I know. So try to do well in them. And if you think that you cannot do well in them, maybe then take the APs or the IBs. But you cannot sacrifice grades for extracurricular activities.
Thank you for being honest. Actually, a lot of students are under this impression that if they do well in extracurriculars and if they do well in SAT, they're going to get through the application process, which is probably not true a lot of times. Thank you, Ishan, for being honest and giving me such honest answers. Okay, what was the biggest culture shock that you faced?
I think I have forgotten many of the culture shocks that I faced. Some that still stand out to me was that I was very surprised by the size of the supermarkets. They're astoundingly big compared to something you see in India. I went to Select City Walk in Delhi, which is said to be like a fairly large mall. The local Whole Foods in Evanston, which is like the small suburb outside Chicago, it rivals that size. So that was one of the things that stood out fairly early when I was in my freshman year. Something else, the toilets have large gaps in them, like the stalls, and that is just uncomfortable for me. They have these slits between the door and the frame, and it just seems pointless. European toilets are so much better.
Something which is very close to my heart. How did you manage homesickness? Which is actually very, very difficult for me to manage at times. So how did you manage that? Did you feel homesick?
I think I did feel homesick in my first year, but gradually you adapt to it as you start forming friends in your college. So I think it goes away over time, and it's obviously nice to return home and eat the food prepared by your mother. But the pain of being away from home does go away for most students fairly quickly.
What's one thing that you wish you would have known earlier in order to avoid some circumstances? Something that you did not know and you immediately went up to this place and came across this.
I think in applying to the US, there's definitely lots of things that I should have known earlier. I think I should have started working on extracurricular activities sooner. Like I had a good academic profile.
So far as I
Yeah.
know, you were already working on your extracurriculars. I mean, you've been a participant.
Yes, I was doing debate and I was doing like I was conducting quizzes, but I was not super focused on them. Like they were always something I was doing besides IIT JEE preparation. I think trying to get some national recognition in debate fairly early, like trying to get into the WSDC team, which is the World Schools Debating Championship team, fairly quickly. That would have like solidified my chances of getting into a top US college. So that's definitely something you can easily do as a high school student. Like if you're in class 8, you can definitely like aim for a specific national level achievement that you want, and that makes the whole process easier.
How do you think the academic system that we are used to in India is different from what you see or any other country?
I think there's quite a few differences. The first is that from speaking to my sister, I get the sense, who is going to college in India, I get the sense that Indian colleges have a more deferential attitude towards professors, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you get closer to your professors in the US. Like I had a professor who left a deep impression on me, and I could talk with him with a level of closeness that would be harder to get. I get the sense in India. They quite quickly tell you to call them by their first names, for example. So that's one difference. The other difference is that there's much more liberty in the classes you can take. You can pick whatever classes you want as long as you fulfill your major requirements by the end of 4 years. And that is a difference in India, where you have to take a certain class this semester. And if you fail it, then you have to retake the exam at some different point in a different semester. And if you get more liberty, that's really quite helpful, because I was able to take machine learning in my first year, which is unusual in India. You usually have to keep machine learning until the third year. And because of that, I got machine learning research opportunities fairly early. So that liberty really does help. And if you can get into an Indian college that supports that, I think Ashoka is closer to that model. Then you should seriously weigh that.
Are there any favorite courses? I mean, you just mentioned machine learning. Can I consider it a favorite course for you, and the professor a favorite one?
I actually did not like my machine learning class because they did not teach me the cutting edge of like technologies. In fact, the language that's used right now in machine learning, PyTorch, they did not even touch that. And the deep learning class is also very hard to get into, which actually does go into those like more modern technologies. So I do think that Stanford and Berkeley and the other college and the other top CS colleges do have an edge compared to schools like Northwestern. That said, my favorite classes have generally been where I did not learn anything that was super useful necessarily, but the professor was incredibly passionate. Like my classical AI class did not teach me anything about the cutting edge, but my professor was a polymath. And in one class, he saw a periodic table hanging on a wall, and he went into a history of chemistry lecture for 15 minutes. And he usually had classes like that, where he went into like the history of technology. And that was super fun to see. As you see an example of a person who's super intelligent and very passionate about what he does, and that leaves an impression on you. So I think in general, if you can, you should take classes not because they seem very useful, but because the professor is really impressive to you.
So, like you just mentioned that you got internship opportunities. And volunteering opportunities as well. Can you mention a few where you volunteered or did your internship?
I think most notably, I did a 6-month internship this year at a company in SF, at an org in SF called the ARC Institute. And there I worked on machine learning applied to biology. And I got that through cold emailing the founder. And in general, it's not hard to get interviews by cold emailing people if you have built a portfolio that shows you know what you do and would not need enough handholding. I don't know how it is in India, but I gather that the startup scene in cities like Bangalore and Delhi really is bubbling. and they pay very competitively and have very interesting work. In general, reaching out to people with proof of work is a very solid way of getting your foot in the door. You should ideally reach out not to recruiters, but to technical leads who will understand that you, despite being fairly young, know what you're doing, and then get into fairly interesting opportunities.
So, how did studying abroad shape your perspective of how you look at your country?
I do think studying abroad places the country in your imagination in a specific corner of the world, and you get to meet a lot more people from different countries. And if you're well informed about the world, if you've read enough, then you can have very interesting conversations with them about cultural differences. I myself have had great conversations about how India differs from, say, Ukraine and China and the US, like how the experience of growing up in those countries differs. And that really adds to, I think, the richness of your life. It won't get you like opportunities, or it's not useful materialistically, but it does add to the richness of your life to have friends you can deeply connect with. So I do think being informed about India and its place in the world is helpful and makes you a better and more interesting person.
One very interesting question I have for you, Ishan, is the fact that what is one thing that you discovered about yourself after you went?
I think I became a lot less shy in the US.
I agree with you.
Yes.
I completely agree with what you're saying.
I was really introverted when I was in school in India. And I don't think it has anything to do with the high school itself. I think it has more to do with growing in life. As I think even in my freshman and towards the beginning of my sophomore years, I was fairly introverted. But then I mostly just decided that talking to people is fascinating and conversation brings a lot of joy. And generally became much more outspoken. So that's definitely something that notably changed.
So, outspoken with everybody or being selective with people?
No, I think being outspoken with everybody, because I think conversation is a joy in general. And if you have a lot of like surface area on the world, if you have, if there's lots of things that you're curious about, then almost every person is interesting. And you should think of life in that way. You should never be selective in the attention you give to people or the things you're curious about.
Do you think this is something that has changed in you? You were not that open earlier? Or I felt that you were a little selective about people.
I don't think I was selective about people. I did not think that people were like beneath me or something. But I think I became, I know you didn't mean that, but like I think I became less concerned about social risks, like the bad things that would happen if I opened up with some. I think I realized that in general people are quite happy to talk with you, and conversation is a joy for basically everyone, which is why they'll quite happly talk with you. Things like that, yeah.
You've been really honest in answering all these questions. Thank you. A little serious question. Do you have plans to come back to India in future?
Like probably not to work. And again, the reason for this is that one of the reasons I went to the US to begin with is that most of the AI stuff is happening in the US. Most of the applications around AI, like AI being applied to biology, or like the frontier AI labs themselves, like OpenAI and Anthropic, all of them are headquartered in the US. So you'll have the most impact if you work in AI in the US. Even companies like Smallest that are very good at AI stuff in India are opening San Francisco offices, for example. So I think, at least for now, it seems likely that the most impactful work is happening in the US. And it makes sense if you want to, say, build AI that advances scientific discovery, or build AI that automates or increases productivity in large slices of the economic pie. You want to be working in the US.
Applying to universities abroad, either for studies or maybe for work also, do you think it's safe enough for us Indians to travel and go there?
I'm actually not keeping up with the restrictions that are being applied to newer, people who are applying after 2024. I know that, like, for me, my visa was not affected. So I should really not comment on what's happening right now, mostly because I just don't know. But my sense is that applying for study visas is still safe. You still get this 3-year STEM OPT, and there are no large charges on it. But I could very well be wrong. I know that studying in the UK and Canada and the rest of Europe
Australia.
is still an excellent idea because like those are still very open to international students.
What advice would you give to someone who is planning to study abroad? One simple line if you want to say. If they're planning to study abroad, what would that be?
You should not underestimate how lucky the people who got into colleges in the US are, especially if they did not go to an international school that charges lakhs of rupees, like in Bangalore or Mumbai. All the advice you hear from me should be filtered extremely through the lens that this guy was extremely lucky, like top 99 percentile lucky. Which is why if you should have fallback options, like you should be prepared to take a gap year if things don't work out and apply to colleges in India. That said, there are very obvious strategies to pursue if you want to go to the US. Like the whole game book is fairly easy to play out. Get good at extracurriculars while maintaining grades and ace the SAT. Like even if you can apply test optional, try to apply with a very high SAT score and write good essays. If you can nail those four things, you can probably get into the US, but have a fallback option.
Having said that, you just mentioned about a gap year. How do they consider? How these colleges consider the gap year because they also consider early decisions?
I think you should apply every chance you get. So you should definitely apply at the end of your 12th grade as well. But taking a gap year is not looked down upon if you're doing meaningful stuff in the gap year. Like if you're interning at a company, or if you're doing your own startup and the startup is succeeding. Like you cannot just be doing a startup and it goes nowhere, for example. In fact, I know a student who got a full ride, and he's an international student who did take a gap year, but he was doing a machine learning internship during that gap year. So if you do something productive in the gap year and you can convince the colleges that you became a more well-rounded person, or you pursued your interests in that gap year, colleges won't hold the gap year against you.
Do you think interning in organizations without getting stipend is a good stuff to do? Should they be doing it?
I think in India, there's a lot of good organizations that you have to intern at without a stipend or at a very low stipend. So, for example, I think that lots of policy think tanks don't pay very much or don't pay at all. I think lots of legislative internships, like if you're interning at an MLA's or an MP's office, for example, they will either pay you very little or they won't pay you anything at all. But that said, I think at a tech startup, the tech industry at India has matured enough and there's enough VC money that you should almost always negotiate for a stipend. If you're good enough to work there, you're probably good enough to get paid for working there. So I think you should map out the market yourself and hear from people who have the positions that you desire to get. If you can negotiate, you definitely should negotiate.
What's one thing do you think the listeners would take away from this podcast?
Definitely, there's two things. The first is survivor bias. The people who got filtered into a selective process had a lot of luck. Again, I am stressing luck because it's just so important to recognize its role. And the other is agency. You can do many more things than you give yourself credit for. In fact, you should be reaching for things that you think you're underqualified for. I cold emailed lots of startups that I did not think I had a shot at because the technical bar seemed so high. But during the application process, I was first of all surprised that they got back to me and that they were giving me the time with interviews. And second of all, during the application process, while preparing, I became much better at machine learning. So, for example, at Arc Institute, the whole thing took a month, and I had to write a blog post breaking down one of their papers. And while I was hunkered down all of December in cold Chicago writing that blog post, I think I became a much better machine learning researcher. So you should definitely try doing things that seem a little out of reach for you, or even completely out of reach for you. And you'll become much more technically qualified and honestly even be surprised by how much more capable you think you are. So have more agency.
That's incredibly insightful, Ishan. I think our students will deeply relate to what you're saying with your honesty, clarity, and whatever you've shared with great insight. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, ma'am.
As we wrap up today's episode, one thing becomes clear. Studying abroad is not about rushing towards a dream, but about preparing for it with patience, purpose, and perseverance. To our listeners, remember, the world opens up to those who prepare themselves for it. This was Vox Populi, where experiences speak and futures listen. This was Vox Populi, where experiences speak and futures listen. Stay curious, stay prepared, and keep dreaming beyond borders.
Beyond the application, beyond the printed page, it's growth in every challenge, it's wisdom.